Managers, what was an excuse an employee gave that you thought was BS until you saw proof? Almost all the women on my team came to me because another came to work in a beige miniskirt that was transparent enough to show her black garments, which was against the company dress code. I get her out and tell her we can't have her showing that much and that she had to fix it before coming back. She came back 2 minutes later, a bright smile on her face telling me she had fixed it. She opened her purse before me, showing me her garments in it. Alright, so was like her name Meredith? Story 2. Not a manager, but actually me. It turns out that the first day after a 3-week vacation, I fell off a bus in movement and I suffered a lot of injuries on my right foot. My mom went to my job and delivered the medical suspension. After 6 months of recovery, I returned to work. I could barely walk by myself and it was extremely painful still. The first thing that my manager said when he saw me was, "Holy crap, I thought you were lying with the whole bus story just to extend your vacations." Like, crap, man, I think that a 6 month suspension just to extend my vacations is quite extreme. Story 3. When I managed a convenience store, a guy who was there didn't complete all of his closing tasks until about 1 a.m. We closed at 11 p.m. It usually took only about 15 minutes. He said it got super busy and someone had a stomach ache in the middle of the store. He had to clean it up. He was known in the past for being lazy and finishing his job and milking his time to get more hours in, so I really thought he was just saying stuff as an excuse. Went back and watched the recording from the night before to be sure I called him out though, and I'm glad I did. You could clearly see about 20 people come about 10 minutes before closing. A dance or something in town was coming to an end, and one guy was leaving a stream of liquid around the store before running to the bathroom to try and clean himself up. Alright, so that guy definitely deserves a freaking raise. Story 4. Was a manager at BK. Kid called in and said he had a bad reaction to some bath salts. I thought he meant actual bath salts, not the substance bath salts. I've bought some of the essential oil salts for the wife and some have made her irritated, so I ran with it. He definitely meant the substance bath salts because I caught him a week or so later doing the stuff in the restaurant bathroom. Dude had a small mason jar full, fired on the spot. His excuse was it was legal and didn't think it would be an issue. Story 5. Not the manager, but the employee. I had requested my birthday off months in advance, but it wasn't approved, so I just sucked it up and canceled my plans. About a week before my birthday, a friend of mine passed away in a car accident, and their funeral was scheduled on my birthday. As soon as I knew, I told my manager what happened and that I would not be coming in. She scoffed and told me that I was just trying to get out of work for my birthday. The funeral existing wasn't enough. I had to prove that I actually went. Story 6. A frequent absentee rushed into my office without knocking, saying he had to go home immediately because of not feeling well. This guy had used so many alibis to skip work, even his workmates didn't trust him anymore. I stalled, taking note of his abysmal work record, bright eyes, and healthy-looking ruddy cheeks, and then decided to give him a stern lecture on workplace absenteeism until he retched all over my desk, family photos, budget reports, and an open laptop. Trying to avoid the tsunami, I launched my chair backwards, smacking my head on a bookshelf. Through the stars, I could see the mess everywhere. I can only conclude it must have been a cold pizza breakfast with a liter of cola. I know some fakers can do that on demand, but I didn't bother to investigate. I suddenly had more pressing problems. Plus, I guess white eyes and a ruddy complexion can be a bad sign too. Story 7. Had a staff member say she'd been in a car accident and couldn't work. We literally had this excuse every other week from our staff. I was not impressed. Turns out she was riding her bike to work and was hit by a car. She ended up in the ICU, and the hospital called us as we were her next of kin. She ended up having a lot of surgery but recovered within a few months. I paid her a few weeks of pay so she didn't go too broke. She was a casual and not entitled to pay until she got back on her feet. So, on at least one occasion, a car accident has been true. And B, people are blowing up in my inbox about her using us as a next of kin. Don't worry, guys. She is a foreign national in our country and her overseas family don't speak English. She also worked directly with me as a nanny for my daughter, so we were somewhat close. We have further emergency contacts for all of our staff, so we could have made further contact if necessary. She recovered from the ICU stay quickly. She's Japanese and hates to make a fuss about anything. I believe to her mind, she was just being logical. She still works with us and is back with her clients who are beside themselves with worry and who all sent her flowers. Story 8. I was temporarily fired for not showing up to work for a couple of days. I'd been called up for jury duty and was selected for a court case, so I filled out a time-off request form and faxed it to my supervisor to approve. When I got to the office after finishing jury duty, I walked into my boss's office, brandishing 1, my jury summons, 2, the original time-off request form and the fact sheet, and 3, paperwork from the court to prove I had reported for duty and served. He called my supervisor into his office and asked her about the time off request form. Turns out my idiot supervisor not only forgot to hand the form in, but for the past couple of months, she had been carrying it around with her. Story 9. My best friend called out of work for what was essentially a bad sunburn once. We were working at a movie theater at the time and she wasn't sure if anyone would believe her, so she decided to drive up to show the managers. She has a super distinctive body shape, so when I saw her across the lobby, I waved and she sort of waved back. A bit later, she walked over to me and she was completely unrecognizable. Turns out that she actually had mild sun poisoning and her face was so swollen she looked like a different person. Her doctor wrote her a note because she didn't want her near the hot popcorn poppers or deep fryers. It took her almost a week to look anything like herself again. The best part was she used the super swollen sun poisoning picture of herself on Tinder for the longest time. Story 10. When I was crew, I called in 5 minutes before my opening shift and told them my back had gone out and I couldn't move. The next day, I heard all about how they thought that was completely made up from my general manager. I told them to call my mom, who explained how she tried for 30 minutes at 7 in the morning to get me onto my stomach so she could ice my back. They had to take her word for it, but still thought it was nonsense since they'd never experienced throwing their back out. They believed I was exaggerating the pain. Less than a month later, they threw out their back at work and had to be driven home. Story 11. A new employee was scheduled to start his first day. He called in because he got a flat tire on the freeway on his way to work. His manager was understanding and told him to take care of it and come in the next day. The next day, he called in again, this time because his radiator overheated on the freeway. He even took a picture and texted it to management and HR as proof. His manager, still being very understanding, told him to come in the following Monday to give him time to get his car repaired. The new employee was, understandably, extremely grateful. Monday arrived and my manager received yet another call. The new guy was on his way and had gotten into a car accident on the freeway. This time, the manager was visibly annoyed. However, the new employee told him to look out the window as our building was on a hill overlooking a large stretch of the freeway. Sure enough, off in the distance, the new guy's car was burning quite intensely. Story 12. I had a really good guy on my team, a great employee, but he was definitely a night owl. He was always late for his morning shifts. Eventually, I had to give him an ultimatum, one more late arrival, and I'd have to let him go. Literally, the next morning, I received a video text from him. It showed traffic on the interstate crawling at about 3 miles per hour, viewed from his passenger window. As the car slowly rolled past, it revealed a car on fire in the center lane. My only reply was, take your time. Bonus, 3 years later, we were both at a party and I was recounting this story to a group of people. He then pulled out his phone and showed the exact same video, perfectly illustrating his unforgettable excuse. Story 13. I work with bus drivers, and one of them is particularly known for his Monday absenteeism after football matches, the European kind. One day, we installed alcolocks on several of our company vehicles. A new policy was for one of our biggest clients, and one of these cars happened to be his. He called in claiming he had eaten bad fruit and his alcolock had gone haywire. Of course, we didn't believe him. The next day, however, he came in with a full lab result and stomach report, along with a small note and an empty box of anti-alcohol tablets. It turned out he had actually been sober for a month. Related but off topic, 6 months into his sobriety, we encouraged him to share his story. The before and after pictures were shocking to many, especially the images of his liver and kidneys. Story 14. Not for work, and it was me, but in college I was in a sorority and we were required to go to this thing called Work Week, which prepares us for Recruitment Week, which was also required to go to as a member. I had a biopsy done on a tumor in my liver during most of the work week, so I had to miss 3 days of it. Then in the middle of Recruitment Week, my uncle passed away, so I told them I had to leave and go to the funeral. They fined me $350 for not being at recruitment because they didn't believe me. I showed them the obituary and everything. Still, nothing. I quit that sorority shortly after that. Story 15. I've had 2 instances where my reasons for calling in sick were initially met with skepticism only to be validated later. The first time, I made the foolish mistake of tubing down a river without applying sunscreen to the lower half of my legs. The burn was severe. I literally couldn't put pants on. I called in sick, which meant my coworker, the only other person who does my job, to have to work double and was understandably annoyed. When I came in the next day wearing shorts and flip-flops, definitely not the dress code, but all I could comfortably wear, she immediately said, "Holy cow, that is bad. You are not lying. Do you want to go home?" The second time, I got bitten by a cat, and the wound became infected, requiring an ER visit and various medications. When I called in, my boss's reaction was, "You're calling in for a cat bite? Okay, whatever." He did not sound happy at all. However, he went home to his wife, who was a nurse, and she explained how dangerous cat bites can be. He apologized the very next day. Story 16. I worked at a 7-Eleven right out of college. I lived in a rich area, so it was a bit of a weird 7-Eleven. Wealthy white high schoolers worked the register instead of, as was more common, poor Indian guys. My coworkers were the kind of kids whose families were well off enough that they didn't have to make their children work at all, but forced them to anyway, just to build character. Anyway, a lot of these kids' families owned horses. My family wasn't nearly rich enough, but horse ownership was really common in the area. The town itself was literally called Colts Neck. Eventually, I became a shift manager. Woo! One day, a kid called in saying he was going to be late. I asked why. He said, bullcrap. Naturally, I was confused. What? I asked. Bullcrap, he responded. He sent me a picture, but it was completely indecipherable, blurry, and beyond recognition. It was impossible to distinguish anything. My first guess was that I was maybe looking at literal bullcrap. Now, I'm no bovine expert, but it seemed to me like he was making this up. This excuse was simply too outlandish, too strange a reason not to come to work. There was no way his scapegoat could really just be bullcrap. It had to be BS. But I ignored it. I waited until he showed up, and when he finally did, he showed me. Sure enough, he had dropped his Mercedes keys in a pile of loose animal droppings. And sure enough, it was not bullcrap, it was horse crap. If I hadn't seen it with my own two eyes, I'd probably think it was just a bullcrap excuse. Story 17. As an employee at a bakery, I called in sick once with a severe double ear infection, complete with hearing loss. Now, normally this wouldn't be a problem, but the day before, I had put in my notice of resignation and told my employer I was moving to Australia. He went around bad-mouthing me to other employees and didn't accept the fact that I was actually sick until 2 weeks later, and my hearing hadn't come back yet. A doctor's note and prescription for antibiotics hadn't convinced him. Only when he came in through the back door and scared the crap out of me when I couldn't hear him walk in. Story 18. This one was me. A few years back, my birthday was on a weekend. I had taken Monday off work, but then Thursday night, something went wrong. I woke up sometime after feeling really messed up with a sticky face, so I got out of bed and turned on the light. My room looked like a crime scene. Nightstand knocked over, red liquid soaking my sheets on the floor, smeared on the walls and door frames heading towards the bathroom, all over the sink and staining a towel horribly. I had had a grand mal seizure in my sleep, fell out of bed and hit my head repeatedly on my nightstand, cutting it up real bad. Sometime after that, I got up and tried to clean myself up and went back to bed, but was still so messed up that I have no recollection of it. I then woke up some time later to find the red liquid everywhere. So I'm standing there, feeling miserable and looking at myself thinking, there's no way I can go into work tomorrow, but I have to let my boss know and I don't want him to think I'm just trying to extend my birthday weekend. So I snapped a picture of myself in the mirror, smeared with red liquid, face bruised and swollen, and texted it to him like at 2 in the morning with a message that I wouldn't be coming in due to having a seizure. I then cleaned myself up, changed the sheets, and I went back to sleep. Story 19. I was an opening shift manager at McDonald's at the age of 18. We had a Category 2 hurricane come through, which usually isn't a huge concern for us. However, I lived in a rural area and I was completely flooded in. I called my boss and explained that I wouldn't be able to come in until I was safe to drive, which wouldn't be until the water surrounding our house receded. She kept pushing me, asking how long it would be until I could get in to open. I said something like, unless you can send a boat, I don't think I'm coming in today. I'm literally surrounded by water. I can't see the road at all, and I'm sure there's flooding all the way into town. She threatened to fire me if I couldn't make it in, and I, in turn, threatened legal action if she did. The most perplexing thing to me was that she lived closer to the store than I did and had just experienced the same hurricane. It seemed logical that if she wasn't in a flooded area, she could open the store herself, right? Story 20. Just before I left the army, I had a new recruit who seemed to make one poor decision after another. He bought a truck with an 18% interest rate, accumulated credit cards with similar high interest, left the state without informing anyone, and was consistently late. To top it all off, he married a street worker. He fit the stereotype of an inexperienced private. One morning, he wasn't at physical training formation. We called him, but he didn't answer, so we went to his barracks room. He claimed to have a migraine and refused to go to PT. We advised him that he should have gone to sick call and that he'd face serious consequences for missing PT. He simply said he'd accept any disciplinary action. My platoon sergeant was understandably upset when he found out. He planned to issue an Article 15, which would mean a reduction in rank and pay plus extra duties. However, an hour later, I received a call from the clinic. He was there receiving an IV and had passed out. Apparently, he had listed me as his emergency contact. When we informed the platoon sergeant, he decided to drop all disciplinary action. Story 21. Yet another person who's not a manager. Last summer, my parents took my boyfriend and I out on their boat. It was a cool day, especially out on the ocean, so my idiot self didn't put on any sunscreen. Bad idea. I got sun poisoning all over my chest and shoulders and ended up retching with a fever of 102. I also found out that I'm allergic to aloe by getting a rash over my sun poisoning blisters. When I told my manager, I could tell she thought I was making it up. Turns out she has never heard of it. She looked it up and up popped a cartoon of a girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, just like me, with all of the symptoms I explained. She apologized when I came back 2 days later and said, "The cartoon even looked like you." Story 22. I feel like every manager in this thread needs to realize that their job isn't as critical as they sometimes treat it. I understand you need that job to support yourself and your family, and you take pride in it. I get that someone missing a day for a random reason can be frustrating and disrupt the workflow, but it's not like any of you are saving lives or building rockets for NASA. I understand if an employee is consistently unreliable and frequently makes excuses, then it's okay to be skeptical. But for the average person who needs that job to support themselves, they're not just going to fabricate an excuse that could lead to them losing their employment and facing financial hardship for months while searching for a replacement. Things happen, and sometimes it feels like some managers treat an employee calling sick as a catastrophic event. Story 23. As an employee living with severe migraine like headaches and another neurological condition, I've had a few occasions where I've literally been within a block of work and had a headache that dropped me to the ground, and I've had a call from the back of the ambulance saying I won't be in. Numerous times I had to bail mid-shift, and I felt like some of that staff thought I just didn't want to work. Then one night I was having brutal pain all day, but I was literally the only dishwasher on staff at that point, so I was doing my best to grin and bear it. I managed to hold on until the end of the night as we were cleaning up after close. The last thing I remember is grabbing onto the shelf at the back end of the dishwasher and then being in hospital mid-afternoon the next day, surrounded by doctors and family, fully in the midst of a conversation. Apparently, I'd been answering questions for an hour at that point. The supervisor who had been working the night before had always seemed skeptical of my issues, but after that night, she bent over backwards to make my shifts as easy as possible for me. Story 24. Happened to me. I left my homework in my locker, so my teacher let me go get it. On the way back from getting it, I see a police dog sitting, tied up outside a bathroom. Obviously, a policeman was inside using the facilities, so I got near the dog and just said, "Hey boy, how you doing?" Upon talking to the dog, he barks loudly, jumps up and bites, snatches my homework out of my hand and just straight up eats it. And I'm standing there like, what the heck just happened? And look around just in case anyone saw that, but no one was around. I found the whole situation so bizarre that I couldn't help but laugh when I told my teacher and class what happened. Everyone just starts laughing, and obviously my teacher doesn't believe me. In fact, she called me an idiot, and so she gives me a detention. I had to go to security and convince them to look up the incident, and after security stopped crying with laughter, I get a copy and show my teacher, and she was utterly speechless. And if you're utterly speechless as well with some of these stories, and you're enjoying the video, of course, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 25. This is a story I gave to my manager. First off, I had a rough childhood. Anyways, I got hired on as a dishwasher for a Cracker Barrel at 16. Before the first day of work, 2 hours before, I called in to let the manager know that I couldn't go work there because my mom got mad at me and took away my phone and my car. At the time, I lived with my grandparents and we were 20 miles out of town, so it was really hard to get there. The manager was the nicest person ever. He told me to call him back when I am able to start working. A few weeks later, my mom gave me my car back, but I ended up taking another job at Wendy's. A few months later, the manager from Cracker Barrel called me and asked me if I'm doing okay and how everything worked out for me. He didn't care that I didn't come back. He just wanted to make sure I was okay because he could tell I was in a lot of emotional distress at the time. Best guy ever. I should have worked there. Story 26. I worked at a Festival Foods a few years ago, and for those of you who don't know, they have a point system there. Coming in 5 minutes late is half a point. No call, no show is 5 points. Once you reach 10, you are fired. I had to miss 2 days of work there, weekend shifts, both 8 hours, because my grandpa was in the ER and lives 3 hours away from me. I called my manager when I was on my way to see my grandpa, and he just said, "Yeah, okay, yep, see you Monday." When I got back to work the following Monday, I had received 3 points for each day I had missed. For clarification, when I brought this up to HR, they said there's nothing they could do. 1 month later, I was yelled at in front of my coworkers by the building manager for smiling too much because it showed a lack of respect for authority. I quit 3 days after that. Story 27. This was me 2 years ago. While on my way to work, I suddenly had an onslaught of non-stopping coughing, and I had to be admitted into a hospital. I fell unconscious for an unknown period, waking up to tubes up my nose, and had to be admitted for about 2 months. I had no way of contacting my workplace, obviously, so my boss was wondering about where I was. Midway through my stay, I had to call back and inform my boss about being admitted to hospital but still could not go to work. The funny thing was, the medical certificate that the hospital gave me looked suspiciously like I forged one since there was no logo and it was all black and white, and my supervisor told me to get a quote-unquote proper one. So I had to get them to print something that looked more official. When I went back to work, I had to tell my boss that I could no longer work full-time for him due to requiring dialysis treatment every other day. Story 28. I was the employee. I had two friends try to end it all one day after the other. I found out about the first one on the day he passed away, right before I walked into work. They sent me home and gave me some time off. Second friend passed away that night, but I'd already had the rest of the week off to recover. Came in the next week to ask for the next 2 weekends off for funerals. They were confused and looked very skeptical when I said another had passed away. But hey, let it go because who's going to call out a grieving 17-year-old girl? My grandfather passed away the weekend of the second funeral, went in for minor surgery on his toe and somehow an air bubble got into his IV, needed a third weekend in a row off for a funeral. My manager looked at me and told me he knew I was lying because I needed time off from the grief of losing one friend, yes, he did emphasize one, and that this is the last weekend he would comply with. I came back after my grandfather's funeral with all 3 funeral pamphlets, a picture of me with my family at the funeral, and printed out screenshots from Facebook showing RIP posts on both friends' accounts. He honestly didn't even schedule me on the weekends after that. Story 29. Not the manager, but was a waitress. Basically, my manager is a good man, but he's kind of a pain in the bum when it comes to getting him to understand that the human body has its days. So one day my coworker calls in sounding like passing away, but admittedly, it sounded kind of played, but I know he's an honest guy. I passed the department phone off to my manager, who proceeded to spout nonsense by saying that we needed him in and that there was nobody else to cover. Truthfully, we would have been fine. Anyways, said coworker comes in looking pale as a ghost. He's full-blown Spanish. Not 2 minutes into being there, and this guy retches on the floor right in front of our manager. We sent him home and ended up closing without any issues. Story 30. Not a manager, but when I was 14, I ended up waking up the Monday after spring break around 5 a.m. with the worst stomach pains ever of my life. My mom was the only one who believed I wasn't trying to buy an extra day of spring break. My dad told her she had to wait until the doctor's office opened as he was not paying a walk-in ER bill for me faking a stomachache. I waited until 9 a.m. and finally went to see my doctor. He doesn't believe me either and tells me I probably have a UTI and sends me home. He says if it gets worse, I can go up to the hospital for a CAT scan. By 1, I can't move and I'm crying because I'm in so much physical pain. My mom, bless her soul, takes me to the hospital and basically says screw my dad and the doctor. Yes, I had appendicitis and my appendix had managed to tuck itself underneath my colon and was close to bursting. Needless to say, I was rushed into emergency surgery. Story 31. I worked at a fine dining restaurant and was scheduled for a double on January 1. I called in saying I couldn't go to work because I injured my back, but I was reassuring my manager I was not hungover. He was just like, yeah, okay, and thought I was totally lying. A few weeks later, during the Valentine's shift, my back got so bad I collapsed mid-shift, went to the hospital, and was admitted for 6 days. About 2 months later, I was admitted again, but for a month and had to have extensive back surgery, and was unable to return to the restaurant. It wasn't until I showed up literally using a walker because I had to relearn how to walk again was he like, oh wow, didn't realize how bad it really was, thought you were being dramatic. Yeah, I just go to the hospital for a month and have to have my life-altering back surgery for the dramatic effect. Story 32. Can this be about school and not a teacher but a student? Screw it, I'm doing it anyway. I was a nervous wreck my freshman year of high school, which turned my stomach into something worse than the abysmal cesspit it already was. I was a little better with going home early and going to the nurse my sophomore year. But during my Spanish final, I felt like garbage. Extreme stomach pains, sweating, faintness. I asked to go to the bathroom, had nothing but agony waiting for me there, and came back. Couldn't concentrate on the exam and said I had to go to the nurse. The teacher, who wasn't even the Spanish teacher, he was only the English teacher who didn't like me, said I had to finish. So I raced through the exam, which I failed, and booked it to the nurse's office. In the hall, my guidance counselor passed and said hello, and I responded by retching in the water fountain. As she looked on in dawning, docile horror, her wet doe eyes wide and squeaking, and oh my, I continued my Tolkien quest for the nurse's office. So I got there, and she said it was stress. I was shouting at her at this point and made her call my mom. She said, well, he seems to be having a stress incident, to which I grabbed the phone and said, you need to take me to the hospital now. My mom got there, to the vehement denial of the nurse that anything was wrong, and took me to my regular doctor. He looked at me for all of 2 seconds and said, I'm calling the hospital to let them know you're on your way. He has appendicitis. Got there, had to take a bunch of those stupid tests to drink the vanilla-flavored milkshake that's actually just dye to see on the scans. They brought me into surgery, and my appendix burst as soon as they took it out. The next day, I called the nurse from the hospital room and said I was feeling better. She asked if my stress was gone, and I said, no, my appendix is though. My mom would like to talk to you. Story 33. This will likely get buried and I'm on the other end of the stick here, but I'll post it anyway. About a year ago, I was working in retail. During that time, my grandfather passed away very suddenly. It was quite a shock. Rosters had already been put out, and I was scheduled to work during the day of his funeral. I went to my manager and told her my grandfather had passed and I needed that day off to attend his funeral and mourn. She laughed and dismissed it, telling me I was to show up that day or I would be fired. I requested the day off multiple times over and even referenced another employee who was given 3 days off to grieve her aunt's passing just a few weeks prior. All to no avail. I was continually told I would be fired if I didn't show up. I ended up having to race to work after the funeral, was 15 minutes late, reprimanded, and just spent the whole shift crying. A few hours later, my dad, who was a regular at the store and very friendly with my manager, came in wearing a suit. My manager saw him and cheerfully exclaimed, "You sure do look fancy today. What's the occasion?" To which he just stared at her and said, "Nada Selecta told you her grandfather's funeral was today." She seriously didn't believe me up until that point. Story 34. I don't ask for proof, regardless of how unbelievable the excuse is. You need to trust your staff. The good ones don't lie, the bad ones generally get performance managed out. I don't see the need to be a schmuck about something that might be unlikely but will almost certainly be traumatic. Same as time off for medical appointments and family emergencies. I just let them take the time off unless there is a genuine crisis in the workplace and they are genuinely rare. You'd be astonished how grateful people are and how motivated they are if you treat them with a little bit of respect and dignity. A few might take the whiz, but if they know you, you'll make life easy for them. If they are in genuine need, they tend not to. Story 35. Not the manager, but the employee. One Friday night after a shift as a cashier at Walmart when I was about 19, at about 11:45 p.m., I was driving 70 miles per hour trying to get home through an industrial area of my town, and all of a sudden, right in front of the 3M plant, I see a deer for a split second, then my airbags deployed. My car was totaled and I was banged up, but wasn't that bad till the next morning. So early the next day, I called my manager saying I was going to miss my shift on Saturday evening. Yeah, the busiest and worst shift in Walmart. She was in a very rude tone and told me that if I was going to not be there, I needed to bring in a doctor's excuse. I wasn't even going to see a doctor, I was just going to rest up and be in for my Sunday evening shift the next day. Well, I went to urgent care, got examined. The doctor had just hit a deer herself going 70 miles per hour a few months earlier. So she gave me a note excusing me from work for a week due to my sprained ankle and other bruises and scrapes. The look on the manager's face when I limped up to her and handed that witch the note was priceless. She started turning red and could barely get out any words. She didn't last long as a manager because she was, well, terrible, but I had my week off and worked there for another few months till I found a better job. Honestly, I still don't know if she really believed me, but when I asked a coworker who drove the same route I did to work in the mornings if he saw the deer I'd hit in that spot on the way in, he said, "No, but I saw what was left from it." Story 36. This will probably get buried, but I can finally contribute. I manage a restaurant in a small town in Canada with a population of roughly 8,000 people. One morning, an opening server was running a couple of minutes late, which wasn't a big deal. Then I received a phone call from this server, and they were quite distressed. "I can't come to work because someone harmed my neighbor," they said. I was a little taken aback and asked, concerned, "What?" They replied, "The police need to question me. They won't let me leave. Someone harmed my basement neighbor. I have to go. I won't be going to work. I'm sorry." At this point, I was thinking that if they truly wanted the day off, they went through a lot of effort to create such a story. This is a small town in Canada. Nothing significant ever happens here. Sure enough, later in the day, the police and fire department placed several large takeout orders. I went to the front and started chatting with the firefighter. He was incredibly pale and looked shaken. I asked what was going on, and he could only say, "He's never seen anything like it. I can't believe something like this would ever happen here." And then he left. Okay, what's going on? I wondered. Luckily, being in a small town, word travels fast. It turned out that someone had indeed used a homemade explosive device against this employee's basement neighbor. The victim was disabled from an accident, and the perpetrator had embezzled all her settlement money. He apparently decided to solve the problem by harming her in her home. The worst part is, he sent a present to the house, and she opened it when her daughter and a helper were in the room. Thankfully, they were okay, but she unfortunately was ended. Needless to say, we gave the employee some much-needed time off to cope with the trauma, as they were home during the incident and were among the first on the scene. It was a truly disturbing event that even made international news. Now I give most excuses a fair chance because at this point, I don't really know what could be true or not. Story 37. Not really applicable, but I had an employee disappear, and for the first month, no one, not even his wife and daughter, could find him. He turned up at work 3 months later. He had been in an ICE detention center with very limited access to the outside world. His green card had been flagged because when he applied for citizenship, he had a ticket for reckless driving, like doing 115 in a 45, that he had paid for and done community service when he was 18, at least 10 years earlier. After that, he always called it, "That time I went to summer camp." Story 38. I have two, and one was sweet, sweet revenge. First one, I had a stomach bug and was working at a daycare. I told the director I was sick. She told me to come in or be fired, so I went in. All morning, I'd race to the bathroom because I thought I would throw up, only I never did. She thought I was faking to leave early. Until the last time, didn't quite make it to the toilet, got mess on the floor. I tried cleaning it up but didn't do a good job and she sent me home. The owner came in, smelled the mess, and made her clean the bathroom. Love that story. Second one, well, just happened. I was a nanny for a lady and sent her a text early one morning telling her I had food poisoning and that I couldn't come in. You could tell she didn't believe me. And a few hours later, we actually called an ambulance to take me to the ER where I was diagnosed with a ruptured ectopic pregnancy and I was wounded internally. My boss just so happens to work in the hospital. They took me too, so I texted her later that evening and told her I couldn't come in and that I was in room XXX. She came to see me the next day, surprised as hell I was there. She even admitted she thought I was faking. I wasn't mad though. Hell, even I didn't realize it was as serious as it was. Story 39. I've been that person calling in. I used to work for the NHS and as such had access to nurses' halls whilst I found somewhere permanent to live. The halls themselves were small rooms from the Victorian era, old heavy doors, etc. Also cockroaches, rats, and creepy old nurses. I woke up one morning ready to have a nice walk in the sun to work and pulled at my room door handle and it came apart in my hands, locking me in the room. I called my boss and she didn't believe me until I called the other office, based in another part of the building I lived in, to get the porter to come help get me. I had 3 social workers come look and sure enough, I was stuck. The mechanism had completely broken. I'd already tried using the square bit to turn the handle thing, and they had to break the door off its hinges and yank the whole lock and handle mechanism. It was a right palaver. Bonus story, once had someone retch on me in a staff lift making my way to my office in the same job. I literally walked into the lobby and they all flinched. I managed to clean off the most of it, grabbed some scrubs and went straight home to shower and recover. Story 40. Not the manager, but there was one time I was working on integrating a substance interaction engine into our software. It was centered around an MSSQL database we got from a third party, and all the manual testing had passed, but then I suddenly was getting bug reports about specific substance codes we'd already tested, sending back incorrect results. So I plugged in the codes manually, and sure enough, the results in the bug reports were the results of the engine was responding with, so I was absolutely positive the problem wasn't in my part of the software. The engine we'd purchased was giving us garbage. That wasn't good enough for the boss. This was a big company in Germany. They had thousands of end users. They wouldn't release something so buggy because of the nature of the data. They release updates every month. So I kept digging. I went to the original source and confirmed the format of codes, old and new. I don't remember off the top of my head, but one of the components had increased in length and there was an odd way of concatenating it until eventually the whole thing was given an extra digit in the form of a leading 0 to make room for new numbers. Since the database had a set length for that field, it was truncating the last digit, the most significant one. This had resulted in substances with duplicate codes in the interaction engine and thus the errors we were seeing. When I came to the boss with my findings, he was livid. He thought I was trying to pawn off the responsibility on the vendor instead of fixing my bad work. He insisted I go back to the manual and figure it out or leave. Yes, he was threatening to fire me over this. I finally convinced him to look at everything from the original codes and formats to the duplicates and missing digits in the database, and he just went silent. He spent an hour on the phone yelling at the other guys about how such errors could get people ended, and we had a new build in our hands, producing correct results by the end of the day. I never received an apology. Story 41. Not an employer, but an employee. At the time, my manager and I were on shaky ground. We weren't getting along. I hated his crap. He didn't care for mine either. He was demanding a report from me, which I could only produce on the office computer. I got to the office 2 minutes early, which was an accomplishment considering I was normally 30 minutes late. I arrive and I see fire trucks and our tiny office just in a massive ball of flames. No crap, so I'm kind of awestruck, like, holy crap. And a few minutes pass by, my boss calls and goes, Cohen, where are my reports? I said, I can't do them right now. He said, what is your excuse this time? I said, the office is on fire. What do you mean the office is on fire? I said, well, I mean the entire office is just one big giant frickin' bonfire. He calls BS, says he's going to be down here in 20 minutes. If that office isn't on fire, I'm fired. 20 minutes later, he shows up. Sure as crap, the office is still on frickin' fire, and he just stares at it in total disbelief like, holy crap, Cohen wasn't lying this time. I guarantee you the first question he had go through his head was, did Cohen set my office on fire to cover up his lateness? To which, when he asked a firefighter how long they've been here, the guy told him about 2 hours. FYI, the office fire was caused by a coworker and his need to keep every frickin' piece of paper and his space heaters. No one was hurt though. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.